understanding cause is at the core of everything we want to do. Not everything. It's the core of much of what we want to do as health professionals. We want to understand what causes the disease and whether the treatment causes an improvement in the patient, or whether the community program for improving nutrition or improving exercise or reducing illicit drug use causes a change in the risk and reduces the risk that young people will go on to develop respiratory diseases. It's really at the core of science for all of us, regardless of your background. So, I'll just check the time. I realise that a lot of people here have got a non-English speaking background, right? Well, of course, all of you have excellent English, but I just want to know, how about my speaking? Is it too fast? Okay, all right. Good. So, this is what causality is. It's a good definition. It's an Oxford Dictionary, I think. It's obvious. The relationship of cause to effects. The idea that, there's the potential for changing an outcome, as I just said before. Many clinical, biomedical and epidemiological research studies focus on causality. Now, here we go. It starts to get a bit complicated. The fact is that most health sciences are probabilistic. We don't do physics. We don't do mathematics, where you can get certainty. In chemistry, often, you mix two chemicals, you know under certain temperature conditions, you know exactly what's going to happen. 100% right. Similarly in physics, similarly in mathematics, it adds up. But in health sciences, in the great majority of the work that is done in epidemiology, it's probabilistic. You don't really know. So we look for a statistical association which shows an exposure, some risk factor, is related to a change in the probability of the outcome of a disease. Certainty is not something we enjoy in public health. I certainly need a better one of these. Oh, come on. Here we go. Association, as we know, you know this phrase, association does not imply causation. It's, so simple statistical associations can't be accepted on face value. Complex diseases have complex multiple causes. That's why they're called complex diseases. So most cancers, most type of organ failure, most mental and neurological disorders, most types of injury and disability, just about all of the main threats to human health have many different causes. Now, in the textbook, do you use the Gordis Epidemiology book? It's an excellent book. Like, I should work for the publisher. I should get a kickback for that book because I can't praise that more highly than any other book in the whole field of public health. It is excellent. Leon Gordis died. He lived to be very old, but he died some years ago. And that book, I've been teaching for a long time, and what I can see all through that book is the person who wrote this is a teacher. He's an excellent teacher at Johns Hopkins University, so it is a first-class book. And like I say, I should get, the publisher should thank me for promoting it. Now, so these examples are discussed in Gordis's book, in the Gordis Epidemiology book. Sometimes we have a situation where a single factor by itself can cause a disease and the disease is not present when the factor is absent. Factor A leads to the disease. Well, there aren't that many diseases, but there are some, like asbestosis lung disease. You don't get it if you're not exposed to asbestos, right? Huntington's chorea. You don't get Huntington's disease unless you have the gene for Huntington's disease. It just simply doesn't happen. So, where the condition itself is necessary and sufficient, Most people are, I don't know exactly how many people were exposed to a lot of asbestos who never get lung disease, but it seems to be clear that people who are exposed to asbestos mining and living in communities where asbestos mining happened, many get lung disease. It doesn't necessarily mean you will, but many do. But certainly you can't get that asbestosis without the specific exposure. So that's one type. Another is where the factor is necessary but not sufficient. So each factor alone does not cause the disease, but it occurs when all risk factors are present. So an example of that is tuberculosis. You have to be exposed to the bacillus, and you need to be susceptible. A lot of people are exposed to tuberculosis and do not get the disease. People with compromised immune systems will often they are susceptible. Their system is unable to defeat the bacillus. Now, this very simple example explains precisely why in the 1990s there was a big return around the world, particularly in African countries, in the United States, in parts of Europe, a big return of tuberculosis because it came on the back of HIV infection and AIDS, where people had compromised immune systems. And when exposed to the bacillus, and because you can get exposed to the tuberculous bacillus in Brisbane, in waterways, you are unlikely to develop the disease because most people will not be susceptible. So, so that's in a case where both factors together will cause the disease, but one factor by itself, not necessarily. Okay. The third example is where it's neither sufficient nor necessary. So in this model, a factor by itself may be related to risk of disease, but the disease might not occur if the factor is present, and the disease can occur when the factor is absent. So you've got A plus B, C plus D, E plus F, or maybe it's just B and F. It can all cause the disease. Consider heart disease. It can be related to raised plasma cholesterol, smoking, raised blood pressure, high density lipoprotein, low levels of physical activity, family history, diabetes, central obesity, raised plasma triglycerides, raised plasma fibrinogen, severe periodontal disease. All, in combination or separately, can contribute to heart disease. See, it can cause by more than one, as I said. Okay. Well, in an ideal world, of course, we could do a comprehensive research that includes everything. It reveals all possible causes of heart disease. You do the best epidemiological study ever for all possible causes of heart disease. Well, that study doesn't exist. And then because after your study, you then totally modify the environment to prevent heart disease. Well, of course not. It's rarely possible because the causes are very complex and the environments keep changing. The question here is what scenario of those simple causal models, what scenario is most common in public health? Well, it's the most complex one. That's why we have epidemiology. If the causes of the disease were simple, we wouldn't need to be here. If the reasons why people take illicit drugs and end up with heart disease secondary to their injection drug use, if the reasons for that were simple, we wouldn't need to be here. Everything is complex. And so we have to deal with not only the probabilistic nature, we don't know the outcomes. The outcomes are not certain. We can't predict with certainty. You can be exposed to asbestos, but you don't know for sure that you will get it. You can be a lifetime smoker and you may not get lung cancer or COPD. We don't know. We can't predict with great certainty. It's probabilistic. And what makes our science more complex is that it's multi-causal as well. Like, for example, in heart disease, so many different possible causes. Like, I'm sure you'll agree by now that, it involves uncertainty. Most scientific, the main objective is to try to understand that uncertainty. The primary logical tool we have is the hypothetico-deductive method. Hypothetico-deductive method. Now, I know some of you have already got training in the logic of science and philosophy of science, so you may be very familiar with this method. But it's totally powerful. I get really excited when I talk about the hypothetico-deductive method. Why, Michael? Why do you get so excited about this? Because it means everything. It means everything. I'll get on to explain. On the basis of a theory, this is simple. An idea about cause, the hypothesis, is tested against data that are derived from careful study. On the basis of a theory, we predict that B follows A. And we compare this to our data. It's empirical, right? Now, as I said to you right at the beginning of today, for most of human time, this didn't exist. This thinking didn't exist. You believe something because someone in authority said it, or because everyone else believed it. You did not test. You did not test because if you wanted to test that if you were Copernicus and you wanted to test the idea that the sun did not revolve around the earth, then you were contesting what people said was in the Bible. What people always knew, that the sun always, everyone knows that, the sun goes around the earth. How dare you contest that? That's why Copernicus, once having proved it, couldn't publish it until after he was dead. Because if he'd published it before he was dead, he may have lived a shorter life. It was that serious because it was seen as a direct assault on fundamental principles of Christianity and the Bible. And there are many corollaries in many religions where this is the case, that it's seen as questioning what's always known to be true. And that is why a lot of the early scientists in Western countries, at least, were regarded as dangerous people. Because you're comparing what's known, what's theorised, your explanation, with what's actually in the data. So, a research question is developed based on established theories proposing explanation for or a pattern in a phenomena. You have a specific hypothesis, and it has to be so specific to make sure it can be tested. The hypothesis is then rigorously tested with experiments, and then the observations are used to judge whether the hypothesis has been falsified. This is getting really, to the core of the matter now, right? This is where I get most excitable, is about this. If the hypothesis is falsified, the patterns in the data were not predicted, then it should be abandoned. If the data don't match what you predicted, you abandon that hypothesis. But if the data are consistent, with what you predict, it does not mean that you are proved right. It doesn't mean that at all. It means you are not proved wrong. You are not proved wrong on this occasion. It doesn't mean that you will always be correct. This is about as fundamental a concept as you get in all of science. Now, it just means that your hypothesis lives to fight another day. The principle, remember this, the principle of falsifiability. There's a philosopher called Karl Popper. He said, we cannot prove theories to be absolutely true. Rather, we can only prove them to be false. And this principle lies at the heart of science. Look, there's Popper there. He's a bit of a stern-looking character, but he was extraordinarily bright. Hang on, sorry. Okay, so, Popper's perspective. Many people think that science is the search for general truths, general laws of nature that are proven to be true. Popper insisted that the purpose of science is to refute, to disprove, to prove an hypothesis false. Statements about nature can't be proved in the affirmative, but they can be refuted through rigorous attempts to disprove them. Why does that matter? This matters more than anything. This matters more than anything in all of science. Why? Because it's democratic. Because as a scientist, you don't have truths. You have ideas that have not been falsified. And what you do, why science works so fantastically, why we have electricity and buildings and air conditioning and PowerPoint presentations, why we live now to be 85 years old, all rests on that. Because if we didn't have that, we would live in the Middle Ages. We would have no progression. Because what that does is says, we don't care. I don't care if you're the most famous Nobel Prize winner. You've got 2 Nobel Prizes and you're a professor at Cornell. You can be a graduate student in the corner over there and you are invited to contest. You are invited to dispute. Not only are you invited to dispute, you are required to dispute, to question. That's how science works. That's how progress is made. If you have a fixed truth, if you said, okay, we've got Newtonian mechanics, the mechanics of Isaac Newton, it's absolutely correct and will be correct for all time. If that was true, none of us would have flown to Australia. None of us would be going anywhere. It would be absolutely impossible to make any progress. It was only possible to make progress because everyone's invited in to question. And that's why that's how it works. And Popper's principle of falsifiability, other people have Popper articulated the principle of falsifiability very well. Let's have a look at another simple example of it. There's 2 professors, and they're looking at a flock of white swans. They're having lunch. An inductionist professor, this is a professor that's saying, okay, I'm looking for laws, I'm looking for rules, I want to know what is true for all time. And this inductionist professor, who's lived in that area his whole life, said, I declare all swans are white. Every swan I've ever seen is white, therefore all swans are white. I have a law. A refutationist professor runs immediately to another lake and finds looking for a non-white swan, finds one black swan and returns declaring the white swan hypothesis to be false. It doesn't matter how many white swans you observe. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't prove your theory to be true. But one black swan proves it to be false. And you always need to go looking for a black swan. This is right from the very start of a science degree. This explains why progress happened in science in the 16 and 1700s and 1800s, and why it's propelling forward at a massive rate now. It's all linked to the idea that you need to refute. It's great, because I really don't I've never been comfortable with absolutes, something to be absolutely true. And this is a good reason why you shouldn't be comfortable either. Popper popped up and said, science must begin with myths and with the criticism